Hello and welcome again to dentReviews. Tonight I'm going to be doing a review of the Truthear Zero Red. This is an interesting collaboration between Truthear and Crinical. Everyone knows Crinical, right? Well, this is a dual dynamic driver IEM, which I think is really interesting. It's got a 10 millimeter dynamic driver and a 7.8 millimeter dynamic driver together in a polyurethane suspension liquid crystal composite diaphragm. Yeah. Total harmonic distortion is less than 1%. It's got 117.5 decibels of sensitivity, and yeah, it's great. Specs are good. It's really interesting to see a dynamic driver with two drivers. You hear a lot about hybrids and tribrids, but you don't hear a lot about dynamic drivers having multiple drivers. At least I haven't seen that much. So that's very interesting because I personally am a huge fan of the characteristics of dynamic drivers over other drivers. So this is kind of a typical cable. It's got a nice right angle connector. Pretty small, fit most cases. It's got a braided cable that comes into a small little split here. And it says Truthear on it, Truthear Co. And then it has kind of molded ear guides like most of these earphones do. It's got a 0.78 2-pin connector, kind of like the Moondrop connector. Little red shells here. Kind of nice. It fits pretty well. I don't have any problem whatsoever with comfort. I think the shell's fairly smooth. It's a little bit on the deep side, but it's not too large. It doesn't hit any parts of my ear. It's not uncomfortable by any means. So that's it. Again, it comes with the earphone. It comes with the cable. It comes with a couple ear tip set, and it comes with the impedance adapter and also some foam ear tips. And then it comes with the manual and a little warranty card. And that's what you get. I am just sitting here with this tangled cable. It's going to drive my OCD crazy, so I'm going to untangle this while I talk. So basically, what do I think about this earphone? Well, as I said, or maybe I didn't say it, but I'm going to say it now, it ranges about $55 to $65, which is a pretty good price for an IEM like this. It has decent cable, decent design and build, so the cable alone, you know, if you've ever looked at cables, 2-pin connector cables, they range from $50 up, so I mean, a lot of times when you look at an earphone like this, it's kind of amazing you can get an earphone for the price of a cable. It does have a cord lock, and it works pretty well. So that's about it. Small connector in the center. I like that. Small white connector. It's good. I like it. So how do they sound? That's all that matters. I should just shut up and get right to that, shouldn't I? So these are very interesting because I had really, really, really high hopes for these. In fact, if you watched the blind shootout I did with Mark over at Super Review, not to sound boasty or anything, but I thought it was pretty cool because I was able to identify these because I knew that it was a dynamic driver. But the response just didn't sound possible with a single dynamic driver. I've never been able to hear, I've never had any IEMs exhibit the response characteristics that these had with a single dynamic driver. But I knew there was no balanced armature in there. I could tell. So I guessed that it was a dual dynamic driver, and I was right, and then the only one I knew about was this, so I guessed it, and it was correct. So anyway, the point being, what was my point? It's a really interesting sound, so I had high hopes for it. For the price, the dual dynamic driver characteristic, and the response that I saw in the graph, I was really intrigued and really wanted to hear this thing and see what it sounded like. So when I put it in my ears during the blind shootout, I think I rated it lower than the LAN in my preference, if I'm not mistaken, because the LAN does have a slightly more neutral frequency response. However, I would say in terms of tactility and energy and, well, just presentation, I would say that the Truthear Red Zero is probably superior to the LAN, but I do think the LAN is a little bit better with frequency response. And I say a little, they're very, very close. If you look on graph, they both have a similar slight bump in the bass or mid-bass, again, compared to my dentReview target, which I'll go into in another video. They're very linear in the neutral mid-section, and the treble has a little bit different character between the two, but is basically similar in the fact that it's not perfectly linear, and they both tend to be a little bit north of neutral. The difference being that the Truthear Red Zero gives a little bit more of a laid-back lower treble, so like the 1 to 2 kilohertz is a little bit more subdued, whereas maybe the upper treble is a little bit more peaky, whereas on the LAN, the upper treble is a little less peaky perhaps, but it has a little more presence in the 1 to 4 kilohertz region. So the LAN does sound a little bit more lean, but also a little bit more smooth overall treble, whereas these come across to my ears as a little bit more V-shaped, a little bit more energy in the treble upper end, and relaxed lower treble, and additional bass kind of give it a kind of a V-shaped characteristic to me. Very slight though. It's a very linear V-shape, and I like it. I like it a lot. I think it has a little bit more precise imaging than the LAN. I'm comparing it to the LAN because they're similar price, similar response, but it has a very precise tactile feel to it. It just comes across, I don't want to call it dark. It's not a dark IM at all. But I just feel like for my personal preference, I'm very critical of that lower treble. Very critical. In fact, I prefer Etymotic's lower treble, and most would probably consider that more than neutral. At the 2 to 3 kilohertz, Etymotic is a few decibels higher than this. So not only does this not match my target, but it's a little bit lower than that. So to me, it just makes me feel like there's a little bit too relaxed lower treble. Again, I'm being very, very critical and using a lot of relative terms here. Compared to many IEMs, this is incredibly neutral with a slight V tilt to it. But compared to something like the LAN or the Monarch 2 or even things like that that are very smooth linear response, this just comes across as a little bit more going for energy in the bass and treble. So I call that V-shape. Now, I don't know how to compare this to other IEMs in terms of the perception I have, but it just sounds somehow narrow. And I don't mean the width of the sound. I'm not talking about like where things are. I just mean that it doesn't hit me with a hyper holographic 3-dimensional high def sound. It sounds just kind of a normal 2-dimensional in your face kind of sound, which is clear and precise, and imaging is good, and instruments have clarity, and placement is precision, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly good IM. And I think I said this in the LAN review, but I think it may just have to do with the fact that they're less expensive drivers, and those drivers just may not have, the performance of the high cost drivers. Maybe not. Maybe it's nothing to do with that. I don't know enough about the engineering to pinpoint such a thing. However, I can say that listening to this compared to something like the Moondrop Kato, which I go back to a lot, the Kato sounds more impressive to me in every way, even though these may have more of a neutral frequency response than the Kato. In fact, I'm going to pull it up here. They're actually like really similar. Ironically, they're incredibly similar. The main difference between them would be that the Kato has a little bit more mid-bass, which I've complained many times about in reviews. That's just, I don't like that much. And I feel like this has a similar boost, just a little bit lower down than the Kato. So maybe it has a little bit cleaner low mids than the Kato, but it just still comes across as being a little bit full in the bass to me. Very slightly. I mean, this is very good bass. In fact, the bass hits firmer and more tactile than the LAN does, but the Moondrop Kato just has a more refined, open, high-def treble sound, even though the response is very similar on graph. So I feel like maybe that has to do with the driver. I don't know. You would hope so with a $280 driver or whatever it is versus a $50 driver or dual drivers. So if that's the case, I don't know. I just know that in a blind test, I could easily tell you the Kato sounded higher quality and more airy and more high definition, whereas the Red sounds incredibly good. And in fact, I'm comparing it to the Kato because I like the Kato's presentation a lot. But comparing it to a plethora of other IEMs, this is top tier. I mean, this is good stuff. In fact, I would say you don't need to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars. I have heard IEMs for hundreds and hundreds of dollars that don't sound this good. The response is excellent. Distortion is low. Frequency is just like very accurate and linear. Maybe a little bit V-shaped, but accurate and linear. Precision is good. Width is good. Comfort is good. There's really not a lot to complain about. It's a phenomenal IEM. I think the LAN leans to a little bit more of a neutral, bright IEM, and this leans a little bit more to a neutral V-shaped IEM by very small differences. If you want something that's more clinical sounding, I'd say go with the LAN. If you want something that's a little bit more energetic while also being maybe easier to listen to, I'd say go with the Red. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about it. I'll be honest, the thing that I found very interesting is I had the LAN, the Red, I had the Monarch MK2, and I had the Etymotic Evo. Yeah, Evo. And even with the LAN in there, I kind of set this aside after a little while listening to it and had really no desire to listen to it for 6 months. I threw it in a couple times here and there to kind of go back and check it, but there was just something about it that it doesn't draw me in. And that really surprises me because I think it sounds great. It's dynamic driver all the way. It has great response, tactility, all the characteristics I love. And yet it doesn't entice me. It's great. I love it. And if it was my only IM, I think I'd be happy. But I'm not drawn to listen to it. I actually felt more drawn to listen to the LAN, and I don't know why, because that doesn't blow me away by any means, but comparatively, personally, I think it was just the presentation of the treble. It just did it for me a little bit better on the LAN. Whereas this probably had better bass, the LAN just had better presentation in the treble and the balance of the overall smoothness of the response. But I'll be completely honest, and I'll get to this in a review about it, but the Monarch MK2 just trashes them both, obviously for the price it should, and it doesn't win in every regard, but I really was drawn to listen to that the most. That's the one that drew me in and made me want to go back. So that's an unfair comparison, I know, but my point is just that I can honestly and sincerely say this is a phenomenal value, and I know I said it a lot, but I listen to a lot of earphones that I want to hear because of the frequency response, and they typically seem geared towards a neutral studio quality sound, and I like that. So I'm probably going to have good things to say about them. I think that for the price, if you want something a little bit more easy to listen to and more energetic than the LAN, highly recommend the Truthear Zero Red. It's great. If you want something a little more clinical, maybe a little bit more leaning towards a forward treble sound, I'd go with the LAN, save you $20. But that's really all I can say about them. I think they do a lot well and not a lot wrong, and they're a great price. So that is the Truthear Zero Red. If you guys have any questions, please leave them in the comments. As always, I'd appreciate it for a like or a subscription, and thank you guys again for watching.